Getting all the right food and nutrition during a pregnancy. Without a doubt, you probably already realize that getting the right sort of nutrition is important during your pregnancy. After all, you're now going to be having another living being relying on you to obtain all of his or her nutrition needs as well, which makes it vital that you're able to give your child what he or she requires. However, this doesn't mean that you should just wait until you conceive to start eating the right types of foods. Contrary to popular belief, getting the right food and nutrition doesn't have to be about eating tasteless and bland meals. In fact, it is completely possible to have healthy meals that are very tasty too. Over the course of this guide, we are going to be looking at the various nutrients that you should definitely be consuming. By knowing the nutrients that you and your baby need, you'll be better able to understand why it is so vital that you obtain them somehow. Before we begin jumping straight into the nutrients though, there is one other area in particular that we are going to deal with: calories. Don't worry if you aren't exactly an expert on calories, but chances are if you've ever gone on a diet before, you're at least somewhat familiar with them. Needless to say, this should be more than enough motivation for you to want to really get your teeth into what this guide has to offer, so let's go ahead and kick things off on that note. Introduction to calories, eating for two. A calorie is a word that invariably ends up getting tied in with exercise, dieting and losing weight in general. So, it shouldn't surprise you very much that this tie-in also applies when eating during pregnancy, though in a slightly different way. On a basic level, calories are just a measure of energy, and thus, when this is applied to food, they signify the amount of energy you're able to get out of a certain food type. Simple enough, right? Naturally, different types of foods give different amount of energy. During a pregnancy, because you're now eating for both you and your child, it makes sense that you would need more energy, both for yourself and for the child. But this doesn't mean that your food intake should double, and that's why the phrase eating for two really isn't very accurate. Yes, you are eating for two, but no, you aren't going to be eating double the calories. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But that's the key point here. While yes, you can eat more if you want to, you really don't have to, and 300 calories is more than enough to support both you and your child's needs. However, for those 300 calories to be enough, you need to make them count. Eating more nutritious food that fills up the calories. Basically, if you follow the first path, you'll need to consume more calories just so that you end up filling up enough nutrients for your child. Of course, if you're ensuring that the extra 300 calories that you're taking on already does just that, then you'll end up consuming less calories overall. End of the day, the latter path is very much the desired one, as not only is it healthier, but it will also mean that you don't put on too much unwanted weight. From the start though, you should know, most of the weight that you gain during pregnancy is not fat, and therefore not connected to calories at all. Many women make one simple mistake though. They figure that since a baby only weighs about 7.5 pounds, they shouldn't be gaining much more than that. Of course, if you're carrying twins, or triplets, you would expect to gain more, but for the standard pregnancy, this is how the weight gained generally breaks down. First, there is the baby's weight that ends up being roughly 7.5 pounds. Apart from that though, there are other items, such as extra stored proteins and fats, extra blood, and other extra body fluids that account for about 15 pounds more. Knowing this should equip you with one key piece of information, and that is that just because you're gaining weight, it doesn't mean that you should be watching your calorie intake more carefully. Sure, keep it to 300 calories or so extra, but don't cut it down from that amount at the expense of crucial nutrients. Everything that your baby needs is in the nutrients, and so cutting back on that will adversely affect your baby's health and development. Nutrients that play a key role in pregnancy. Now that we're getting down to the nutrients themselves, you can expect to be getting a lot of information that is going to directly relate to what you eat. Long story short, every piece of food you eat is probably made up of multiple components. Needless to say, you could classify better food as those types of food that have many different nutrients packed into them. Similarly, the not-so-good food would be more of the variety that have little or no nutrients to speak of, and are just comprised of mostly carbohydrates or fat. Protein. Without getting too technical, it would be best for us to think of proteins as building blocks, so to speak. Call them what you will, there are essentially about 20 different types of proteins, or rather, amino acids, as the proper term is. Protein has a number of roles, but not the least of which is in the area of cell production. As you should very well see by now, proteins are definitely of the utmost importance, and for a childbearing woman, this importance should never be understated. If you're not getting enough protein, your body may have trouble supplying your baby with the protein necessary for its growth. Basically, you don't need to be stuffing yourself full of protein, though that would be excessive. Some of the most common sources of protein include lean meats, poultry, fish, and dairy products. Although there are other sources too, the ones that we just mentioned are also the source of various other nutrients, which makes them all the more desirable. Depending on your diet, you may even find that you don't need to willfully consume more protein. However, for full-fledged vegans, your only source of protein would be soy products. Mostly, this isn't a problem, but vegans and vegetarians may have issues getting some of the other nutrients that they require when pregnant. Sometimes, it could be best to talk to a doctor or a nutritionist, but this guide should give you a good idea of what you're after. Carbohydrates. Being your main source of energy, and thus, also your baby's main source of energy, carbohydrates cannot be ignored or set aside. True, may people opt for low-carb diets, but pregnancy is hardly the right time to cut back on your energy levels. Face it, you're going to need all the energy that you can get, so don't starve your body. Among the best sources of carbohydrates are whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. As you should know by now, these are the best sources because of the other nutrients that also come along with them, as part and parcel of the same food. Depending on how active you are, your metabolism rate, and other factors, you'll find that the ideal carbohydrate intake varies. A good rule to follow is to assign breakfast as the meal when you consume the most carbohydrates. That way, you give your body a nice energy boost soon after you wake up, and also ensure that you have ample time to work your way through the energy, so that there is little or no excess. Later on, you'll see that there exists a particular kind of carbohydrates, fats. Although most people tend to shun away from the very word, fats are really a very necessary part of nutrition. For the most part, fats are a large energy source, that much is evident from the high number of calories that they carry. However, when it comes to pregnant women, there is another consideration that must be made. And, as you may have guessed, some of these essential fatty acids are crucial for a baby's development, and are used in a variety of functions that range from transporting vitamins, right on to developing the nervous system of a baby. So in short, you can't just cut out all fats from your diet entirely. Still, that being said, there are many kinds of fats, and it would be best if you try to stay away from saturated fats, and instead only go for the unsaturated variety. Try as hard as you can to keep your fat consumption anything from 20% to 30% of your total calorie intake. One particular type of fat in particular, known as DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, has been shown to really play a huge role in the development of a baby's brain and eyes. Commonly, it is found in oily fish, but nowadays you should have no problems locating supplements for it if you desire. Aside from these common nutrients that we've been discussing though, there are others that really are going to be very necessary in order to ensure that your child has everything that he or she needs to develop. So let's move on to a class of nutrients that you should definitely know about. Minerals. Granted, there are a lot of minerals out there, but when it comes to pregnancies, some are more important than others. Different minerals tend to have vastly different functions, and it should come as no surprise that the minerals we are most interested in are those that tie in with development in some way or other. These minerals, which are somehow connected with development, would naturally be needed in higher quantities than the norm during a pregnancy, as your baby will require them in order to grow in his or her own right. Thus, babies require it too for exactly the same purpose. Furthermore, calcium also plays a role in helping with the production of fluids for the lymphatic system. Don't worry if you don't know what that is, but just rest assured that calcium is of crucial importance. Alternatively, you could skip the dairy products entirely, and go for very dark green leafy vegetables. Nowadays, there are even a variety of calcium-enhanced juices, cereals, and so on, so you should have no trouble finding a good source of calcium that you can consume on a daily basis. Overall, you should be getting about 1000 milligrams of calcium a day for the duration of your pregnancy. Anyway, now that we've discussed calcium, it's time we move on to another mineral. To iron. Yet another mineral that you probably recognize. Iron is definitely a mineral that has such a large variety of tasks that it would be impossible to function without it. Primarily, the most well-known function of iron is its role in helping to carry oxygen through the blood, and delivering it to the entire body. For babies in particular, iron is irreplaceable as it is needed to help develop the circulatory system of your child. Now, pregnant women already have an increased amount of blood flowing through their bodies compared to non-pregnant women. That means that already they need an increased amount of iron. Some of the best sources of iron are various forms of meat, with red meat being an especially good source. Poultry, fish, dark green leafy vegetables, eggs, and so on are also other sources, but it is worth noting that iron is not absorbed as well from eggs and vegetarian food as it is from meat. Therefore, if you're a vegetarian, you'll find that you need to consume a larger quantity of such foods to get the required iron content. Honestly, your baby needs the iron, as do you, or you risk developing a whole lot of problems, including anemia. What we've covered so far are the most important minerals out there for pregnant women. Do be aware though that, as a part of a balanced diet, you should really be consuming more than just these minerals. Well, even if you don't, no need to fret. Folic acid, or folate, as it is sometimes called, is really just a type of vitamin B. Normally, the body requires it to help replicate DNA as well as produce and maintain new cells. Unfortunately, many pregnant women do not actually end up getting enough folic acid from natural sources. About 40 milligrams is the standard requirement. Sources of folic acid include things such as dark, green and leafy vegetables, dark and brightly colored fruits, beans, peas, and even nuts. However, even if you do eat some of these kinds of foods, chances are you aren't eating enough of them to fulfill your folic acid needs. Start to be sure that you're getting enough folic acid before your pregnancy, so that from the very first moment of conception, your baby's risks are lessened. Other vitamins. In tandem with the specific case of folic acid, there are other vitamins that are also going to play roles in the development of your baby. Since vitamins are such a diverse bunch, the roles they play are equally diverse, so let's look at them one by one, or at least, hit the big ones that you should be aware of. 1. Carrots are one of the best sources for vitamin A, but apart from that, you could find it in ample quantities within dark leafy green vegetables, and even sweet potatoes. 2. Vitamin C. Earlier we touched on how vitamin C can help iron absorption from vegetables. Vitamin B6. During normal times, vitamin B6 has the important task of helping with metabolize proteins, fats and carbohydrates, and also help form red blood cells too. However, during pregnancy, the role that vitamin B6 plays is definitely enhanced, as it has been found to be required to help develop the brain and nervous system within unborn children. Some of the best sources for vitamin B6 include pork, ham, whole grains, as well as bananas. That aside, it also, in itself, helps with the formation of teeth and bones, which is very much necessary for a child's growth. Fortunately, as you already know, the body produces vitamin D of its own accord, when exposed to sunlight. So all you need to do is ensure that you're not cloistering yourself indoors and that you're actually getting a little sunlight here and there, and you should be fine. Speaking of unhealthy diets, even though you now know most of the essentials of nutrition during pregnancy, there is still something else to consider, all the bad things that you should avoid like the plague. Let's take a look at those right now. Food and substances worth avoiding during pregnancy. As part and parcel of getting all the right food during pregnancy, you'll also want to avoid the wrong types of foods and substances. And even more unfortunately, some of substances are actually quite addictive, as you'll soon see. That makes them even harder to avoid, but there are several very compelling reasons why you should still try. Anyway, without further delay, let's start looking at the specific types of food and substances that we're talking about. For one, alcohol has been substantially linked with causing birth defects, which can range from very mild, but in some cases could even be severe. Really, the list of such defects is pretty long, and includes things from mental retardation, right on to defects involving the heart, face, and other parts of the body. In short, you don't want to risk such things happening. Just be sure to stop as soon as possible. Bottom line, it is worth becoming a teetotaler for your child's sake during your pregnancy. Caffeine. Next up, as far as things to avoid are concerned, is caffeine, which, as you probably know, is widely found in a number of drinks. Basically, caffeine is completely safe, as long as you're consuming it in moderate amounts. Incidentally, the standard definition for moderate caffeine consumption is about 300 milligrams in a day, which amounts to about 3 cups of coffee, or thereabouts. Going above this limit, however, can cause unwanted side effects, including birth defects. Even after your baby is born, if you're breastfeeding, you'll still want to keep your caffeine intake to a minimum. Largely, this is due to the fact that caffeine could transfer to your baby through your breast milk, and lead to countless other problems. All things said and done, as long as you're able to cut back, by hook or by crook, you should have very few issues with caffeine. Apart from these though, there are other things that you might want to be careful about, but for a very different reason, as you're about to see. Food safety during pregnancy. Knowing the right food to eat is a great start, but you must still be careful. Nutrition and the adverse effects of some foods are both cornerstones of good eating for a pregnancy, but there is one more risk that needs to be addressed. This risk takes the form of foodborne diseases. And unlike you, your child, when exposed to certain diseases, could end up suffering side effects that you may not even realize exist. When it comes to food safety, there really is no such thing as being too safe, and knowing what to look out for, avoid, and how to go about food safety in general, is going to be a tremendous asset on your part. Here are some of the risky diseases that you should be aware of. Listeriosis. As a disease, it is spread by a form of bacteria, and is found in earth and groundwater, and therefore also commonly located on plants. At first, if you have listeriosis, you may not even notice it. Mostly, it would pass itself off as a type of common flu, and you'll end up having a fever, chills, and maybe even diarrhea. However, as the disease progresses, it could even affect the nervous system, and cause headaches, stiff neck, confusion, balance issues, and so on. Listeriosis very often results in miscarriage or premature birth. In some cases, it can even lead to fetal death or cause a severe illness in the newborn that could be fatal too. Basically, even if the baby is born safely, it doesn't mean that the risk goes away. Toxoplasmosis. As yet another very real risk, toxoplasmosis is a parasite that is spread through food. Overall, its risk is most apparent in the fact that it can cause many health problems in unborn children, the more serious of which include mental retardation, and even blindness. For most grown-ups, however, they may even have been infected before, and simply not noticed it or built up an immunity to it. Mercury poisoning. Last, but certainly not least, there is the question of mercury poisoning. Most people don't even really think this is a legitimate risk since, after all, we're not really exposed to mercury all that often, are we? Well, the truth is we are. While it may not be enough to harm you, it could harm your child. Notably, mercury is known to cause defects in a developing nervous system. Frankly speaking though, this is one of the easier risks to avoid, seeing as the types of fish that normally can have dangerous levels of mercury are rarely staple foods in any diet. So, if you happen to have a taste for any of those, you may want to consider laying off them for the time being, at least until your child is born. Food safety measures 101. Great, so mercury poisoning can be avoided by dodging certain types of fish, but what about the other two diseases that we discussed? Frankly speaking, they are not too hard to avoid too, and all you need is to be aware of a few simple, basic, and really straightforward food safety measures that you can implement. Here's a list of what you should do. 1. Cook food thoroughly at the recommended temperature. 2. 3. Avoid all food that contains unpasteurized milk. 4. Avoid refrigerated foods that are uncooked or partially uncooked, such as pate, spreads, and smoked seafood. Do not eat frozen hot dogs, luncheon meat, or deli meat unless they are cooked properly and fully. Simple enough, isn't it? All of these steps combined should dramatically reduce your chances of ever having to face either listeriosis or toxoplasmosis. Effectively, this completes your journey through discovering what you should, or should not, be eating during a pregnancy. In just a few words, we'll leave you to go ahead and start applying everything that we've covered. Final words on eating right during pregnancy. Although our approach has been centered on the idea of eating with pregnancy in mind, you'll find that a lot of what we've discussed is actually beneficial to you at other times too. First, you found out that eating for two doesn't exactly mean eating for two, and know a bit about calories and weight gain during pregnancy. 2. Next, we went over nutrition, comprehensively cataloging what you should or should not be eating. 3. After that, you delved into some substances that should be avoided at all costs, or at least reduced. 4. If some of it doesn't seem to ring a bell, then go ahead and refer back to the previous pages. End of the day, with the right food and nutrition during pregnancy, your baby will be healthier and happier. Good luck with it all.